Hello and good evening. Today I have my colleague Rainer Hahnekamp and we will talk about testing in 2024. Hi Rainer.
Hello, Manfred. Hello, and also hello to everyone who's listening. Hello again.
So we have a really exciting topic, but we decided to postpone it to the end. It's about all the things around end-to-end testing, but we will start with a more general question, a question that comes quite often, namely, what should we test and how should we test it? When does it pay off to test this or that?
Exactly. So, well, we could say, first of all, if we look at the history, in the very early days where we started to work with Angular, we used to kind of map the testing techniques which we've learned in the backend directly to Angular. And that meant that whenever we want to write a test, we took a particular component or a service, but we only took the class, the TypeScript class. We tried to instantiate that class, and we mocked everything away which was not part of the class. So all the dependencies were mocked, and this is
Mhm.
then what we more or less tested. And over the time, we kind of realized that those kind of tests, they don't give us that much benefit because I have to write quite a lot of code. It's not easy, and still I have to question myself, what do I get in return? Do I catch now more bugs? Can I now really rely that my application is working? I also have to maintain all these tests, and this was also very often we asked ourselves, is it really worth it? And that's also why you ask the question, what should we test? Which you're already implying, do we actually have to test everything? Exactly because of that. And well, then we kind of started to realize that maybe it is better to kind of focus when we have a component to focus only on a particular on a component, but not kind of instantiate the class, but communicate with this component in our test via the DOM. So instead of calling event listeners, methods, functions of that class, we clicked on the button and then we hoped that, of course, then internally the event listener is triggered. Instead of kind of going to the component instance and asserting against the value of a property, we said no, there should be a visual output. So somewhere in our DOM, something should show, should be rendered, and we assert also against the DOM.
Mhm.
And then the last question was always, okay, but what do we do with the dependencies? Do we mock them? If not, what kind of dependencies do we want to keep, and so on and so forth? And there we usually say, well, if we want to test maybe a feature, then it would make sense that we also add all the dependencies that such a feature has. Of course, we would never send a request to the backend. This is something we would always mock. But those elements which are directly attached or which are part of the test of the feature we want to test, they are included in the test as well. And that could be services, that could be subcomponents, pipes, directives. We would try to pack everything into the test then.
Mhm.
And it's of course quite a lot, but the advantage then is that first of all, you have to do way more work for a single test than what you have done before, where you only tested the TypeScript class. But nevertheless, you had a much higher coverage first of all. And here
Mhm.
I don't want to say you do it for code coverage, but it's really that you can say, okay, you see that the things, that the elements that make up that feature, they all work together very well. This is what you actually want to test, and you are very close to the reality. So you communicate with your component and with all its dependencies in the same way as your end users are doing it in the application. So in
Mhm.
terms of confidence, it's way higher, and this is something which we then realized might be the better way, that we
Mhm.
focus on those kind of higher level tests. Of course, this doesn't mean that we don't have to write any unit tests anymore. So like we are only focusing on the TypeScript class. That yes, that they also are required, but only for those parts where we say we have a lot of logic
Mhm.
in services or so. Their unit tests are perfectly fine. But when I have actually no real logic, and everything my application is doing is that it just loads data, shows it, and then sends it back to the server. Then doing unit tests where I test if a service is calling the HTTP client, and I have already mocked the HTTP client. This kind of tests they don't give you that kind of benefit back and might not be really good.
That's an interesting point, because this means we move away from a paradigm that was quite common. We move away from the testing pyramid to another shape of testing.
Exactly. So we can call the shape the testing trophy, which means in the middle it's quite wide, and on the lower and on the top it becomes small again. But the amount of unit tests that we write, and also the time we invest in unit tests, is not that large compared to the how I call it, component or integration tests. That's true.
Awesome. So this is a bit a change in paradigm, but as you say, the experience has shown that this brings more return on invest, if you want to put it that way.
Yes, exactly. And I also think then the question, what do I have to test, meaning what do I don't have to test, is also not really important anymore, because when I said before, you have a service which is calling an HTTP, or which is using an HTTP client, I'm not saying you don't test the service anymore, but the service will be used in one of those integration tests together with your component, and maybe also in combination with some other tests, with some other services that it is using. So you will still test even those kind of smaller services, but it makes more sense.
I think you have prepared 1 or 2 slides about this.
I have prepared them, yes. So it's just 2
let's
slides.
Visualize it, because
Yeah.
changes in paradigm are always a bit hard.
Yeah. So this is this kind of unit test that I was talking before. That the term unit test has different definitions. So when I'm talking to somebody about testing, one of the first questions that I come up with is always, what's your definition of a unit test? And the way how we see it here is that a unit test tests only the TypeScript class. Even if it's a component, it completely ignores the template, which means the communication goes via the methods of that class and also via its properties. And all the dependencies are mocked. So we only focus on that small part there, which, as I said, very often doesn't do that much. This is the unit test. And then the other extreme would be the component integration test. Again, it depends again on the definition. But in general, most important thing definitely is that your tests communicate with the component via the DOM. That's crucial. That's really important. You don't want to mock the DOM. Don't do that. And when it comes to the dependencies, it depends. So if it's a small feature, I would try to put as much as I can into the test together. If it's a huge application, then of course, just mocking the HTTP client will not be enough. You will also have to kind of mock certain services which don't play a direct part in the feature. For example, a user service. So if I say I have an OAuth2 or library which I'm using, and it's used because my component needs to know what the current user is, then of course I will also mock that kind of user service, or however you call it, together with the HTTP client. But the user service, it's important, but it's not really the thing that I want to test when I talk about a certain feature. This is what I mean, that you have to be a little bit selective when you have a larger application. But in general, the tendency is that you try to add as much as you can to your component and test it like this.
So I think this transition over to the testing trophy, away from the testing pyramid, started already several years ago. And at the beginning, there was a lot of discussion. Meanwhile, huge parts of the community see it that way, at least in the front community. What does the Angular team say about this?
Yeah, so for a very long time, not that much, we had, of course, the official documentation, which kind of promoted very intensively the testbed approach. But I think there were even comments about instantiating a test, like just calling new component something, instantiating a component manually. And 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a GitHub issue, and I can also show that one. I need to share my slides. I need to share my screen. There was a GitHub issue which started with a testing related question, where somebody asked that, in this case, he wants to be able to write a test with an effect, but he doesn't want to use the test bed in that case. And then the discussion moved on, and we had them at the very end. So this is here Alex Rickerbo from the Angular core team, where he kind of gave his generic view. But what's really important is then here this last summary, or his last statement, where he was actually saying, if you have tests, then the first thing, or where you actually start, is always the test bed. So you don't go any lower, you don't instantiate the class on your own, you use the test bed. If you have a component, you are also then using it, you're also testing it via the DOM, which means you have change detection in place, you also have the dependency injection in place. So all those things which are actually part of the Angular framework are now also part of your tests. They are also running because what they saw at Google, because there they have to write quite a lot of tests, that they saw whenever developers started to try to mock features or parts of the Angular API, this always went completely wrong. So there were a lot of struggles. It could be that the test kind of produced completely wrong results, which didn't reflect the real life behavior of the component. And it's not worth it. Because very often we also hear this old argument, well, we can't use the test bed because the tests are too slow. It's much faster if we instantiate the class on our own. And here we also was saying that argument might be true, but it's only true if you're using an Angular version prior to version 9, which is before Ivy was there, because in the meantime, the compilation is already very fast, and the performance argument isn't that a strong argument anymore. I mean, we can still say, yeah, there are some milliseconds which you have to kind of accept when you use the test bed, but you are getting so much back. And I have seen so many issues coming just from wrongly mocking the behavior of the Angular API. For example, lifecycle hooks. When do I have to run ng on init? When do I have to run ng on changes? What comes first? What comes afterwards? I mean, of course, you can read it up, but it's very easy that you get this wrong. And then this is exactly what Alex was saying. This is just a small use case where you have a completely different behavior, and your test is not worth anything. It's even worse. It gives you a wrong result, and it completely drives you into a wrong direction. So don't do it. Use the test bed. Make use of the Angular API of its lifecycle hooks. Angular will do that for you, and you just focus on your test.
Awesome. It's really cool that we get those insights into the experiences people made at Google, and that we have an official statement regarding something like this from the Angular team.
Yeah, I also talked at the NGConf with Jeremy about this, because what the Angular team is always saying, they are responsible when they introduce breaking changes, they are responsible also to fix them. And I said, okay, but what counts as a breaking change? Because if there are no tests for a project, how can I prove that this actually, that the change in Angular broke my application? And he said, you don't get that far in Google if you don't write any tests. So everyone is doing it. And he says, of course, the test is the boundary. So every application needs to provide the tests. This is the specification, and this is what the Angular framework is working towards.
Yeah, I think you won't even land your PR without any tests.
Probably,
Someone would very likely say, no, this will not be merged.
Exactly.
Nice. So let me also refer to other thing you said before. You said when we move over to the testing graphy, we also test on the level of the component, which means we go via the DOM.
Yes.
However, DOM access was always a bit special in Angular. We had the impression that there is some room for improvement. So how do you deal with this?
Yes. So in general, I say it is crucial that you know how the testbed works, about the internals, about the basic rules that you need to call the change detection or detect changes. There's also a possibility to do this automatically. You could also have to know how to deal with asynchronous tasks and how to dispatch DOM events, because sometimes that's also necessary. But in general, if you really want to write a huge amount of component or integration tests, you use also a library on top of it. And there are 3 libraries which I can kind of recommend. We can also include a 4th one, which are the Angular harnesses, but that's more when you have a UI library. But when you write really functional tests, then I'm sharing my slides again or my screen again. Then I would recommend, here we are, ngMocks. ngMocks is something, as the name says, it's generally focusing on the mocking part. And yeah, I've said before, maybe don't over mock things, but there are of course some use cases where you have to mock something, and here ngMocks is extremely powerful. You can mock services. Obviously, you can also mock components, pipes, and directives. That's very easy. So whenever you say, okay, I want to test now a certain feature, but this component, a branch of the component subcomponents is something I don't want to have in my test because for whatever reason, then I want to mock this branch out, then you can just say mock component, you provide the subcomponent you want to have mocked, and ngMocks will take care of it. And ngMocks is something you can always use also in combination with other libraries. Definitely something you should have installed. And then I would say you have to decide, or you should decide between Spectator. Spectator is a very generic testing library. It is, of course, as ngMocks and also as all the other ones, they're all based on the testbed. So they are not an alternative, but they want to just make things easier for you. Spectator is doing quite a lot. It has support for automatically mocking services. It has support for automatically calling the change detection or triggering the change detection, and some other utility functions, I would say. Definitely something worth looking into it, but my favorite actually is the testing library. The testing library, first of all, that's the real name. So this is a library which is called testing library. It exists for different front-end frameworks. Its initial or its first kind of version was for React, but it has many bindings, so also bindings to Angular. And for the Angular part, the main person which is responsible is Team Describer, and he's part of the NGRX team, so he knows quite a lot about Angular, about the internals. And I would say the testing library is in good hands, of course, also with the other contributors that he has. So there are also some other very familiar faces there. And why I actually want to recommend the testing library. So first of all, we see here the testing trophy from Kent Dodds, who was also the initiator of the testing library itself. The testing library kind of tries you to steer you into the right direction, whereas Spectator in a way says, I am very generic, you can use me for different use cases. I have the feeling that the testing library is highly opinionated, that it says, well, we start at the DOM level, we don't go any deeper, so I don't even give you any functionality where you could actually access the component instance or something like this. Then you have to use the native tools. And you also see here that all those functions that we have, the get by role, what else is there, get by text, for example, they are all based on this kind of fact that you communicate with the DOM via your test. And the testing library also makes sure that asynchronous tasks are executed. There are some internal functions there, especially those functions which start with find. So if you say your screen find by text or screen find by role, then you have a promise, first of all, but inside of this asynchronous task, they are making sure that the asynchronous tasks are executed and also that the change detection is executed. So you don't, for example, you very rarely see a detect changes command or a tick command when you use the testing library. And
Mhm.
in my experience, those
Good.
two things, the change detection and the asynchronous tasks, are one of the hardest parts. So if the
Yeah.
testing library takes them away, that's already a very big win.
Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, good that we have such libraries that abstract all of this.
Yes, yes.
So, what's with the rumor that Jasmine and or Karma will be deprecated?
Yeah, that's a rumor, at least part of it. So the Angular team said that they wanna deprecate Karma. In fact, it's
Mhm.
already marked, or it's already officially deprecated. And first of all, one has to realize that we are talking here about two different things if we say Jasmine and Karma, because the main thing that the Angular CLI provides us in terms of testing, the testing framework, is Jasmine. Now, Jasmine is not deprecated. It's maintained. There is no reason why somebody wants to deprecate Jasmine. But the problem with Jasmine is it just provides you commands for writing tests. And if we want to use components, which also want to render somewhere, then the components inside of our tests will at a certain point in time say document create element. And then somebody
Mhm.
needs to be there in order to fulfill or to provide this command. And this calls for a web kind of environment. And this is what Karma is responsible for. So Karma is the thing that takes the Jasmine tests and puts it into the browser. And then the browser, of course, provides its native web API, also provides the rendering, and then the tests are running inside of the browser context. And
Mhm.
what's going to change is now Karma. So only this kind of mechanism to
Mhm.
take the Jasmine tests and put it into the browser, that's going to change. We will now have the web test runner from Modern Web. This is a modern version. It's doing quite a lot of nice things already. And yeah, Angular will just replace Karma with that one, which of course also means we don't have to change anything. So the code that we
Mhm.
write is Jasmine code.
It's a good
And since
message.
that's, yeah, and since that's not going to change, it just maybe look, we will, I guess the UI will look a little bit better when we use the test runner. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So, what's with stuff like Jest?
Yes, so the chest story is an interesting one because we have already chest support from the community for many years. We have the NX integration of chest. We also have the CHEP builders. So that's a library where you can come up with your own builders for Angular CLI if you don't use NX. And they, as I said, they are community projects, so they are not officially supported. And
Mhm.
the Angular team, once after they have done the migration to the web test runner, so this is web test runner has the higher priority, but then they want to also integrate Jest into the Angular framework so that the Angular CLI also supports it natively, which means we don't need to use any community plugins anymore. We just say ng test, and then there will be an official builder provided by Angular, which will then run Jest.
Mhm. So, Jest is one thing that some people would like to use officially with Angular. Another thing is Vitest.
Yes, yes, yes. So Vitest is, I would say, the newcomer. In
Mhm.
JavaScript, we can say we have three major testing frameworks: Jasmine, Jest, and Mocha, where Jest is the top runner. And Vitest is something we see now more and more, especially newer frameworks, but also other frameworks or meta frameworks, which also now pop up, um, provided out of the box or provided actually as the default testing framework. And Vitest has the nice advantage over Jest that it's modern, it's younger, and it has some things which Jest doesn't really have, especially ESM support, so ECMAScript module support. Vitest just works with it out of the box. In Jest, we still have ECMAScript support in an experimental mode.
Mhm.
And I heard already some rumors that people say, well, they don't think that Jest will ever provide stable support for ECMAScript modules. Yeah, we don't know. We will see. But But the reason, or I think the important thing, why ESM, or what is actually the reason why I mention it, is that in Angular, all the modules are compiled down to ESM. And
Mhm.
that's, of course, then also very important that any tool which runs code needs to be able to understand ECMAScript modules. And this is where Jest is not good in, but Vitest just provided out of the box. So when Vitest was created, it was already clear that ESM is coming, and also TypeScript. So also Jest has been there for a very long time, where TypeScript was not that popular. And with Vitest, it's a different story. TypeScript is the language to go to, and Vitest has also native support, or first class citizen, or sees TypeScript as first class citizen. Let's put it like this. So we have
Mhm.
way more. We don't have those kind of issues that those kind of builders take away from us. So we don't even see those problems. They're doing a very good job. But nevertheless, somebody has to be there who has to fix it. And with Vitest, it just runs out of the box.
Mhm.
Now the
Nice.
problem is, how do we get it into Angular?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that would have been your next question. Vitest requires Vite. So that's also where the name comes from. And the thing now is, where we don't have real Vite support. We only have it for the dev server, but not full support. And the only option that we have at the moment is that we use the analog framework, because the analog framework, this is a meta framework. So that's the way how it is called. It has different functionalities. One of them is support for Vite. And once you
Mhm.
have support for Vite in Angular, you can also use Vitest. So if you want to use Vitest, then analog would be the answer.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's an awesome community project. It was also featured last week at NGConf in Salt Lake City. Brandon Roberts really does a great job with integrating this stack into Angular.
Yes, yes, yes. And he also understands, I think, the needs, the business needs, because he says, if you want to use Vitest, then I'm not forcing you to kind of install or kind of consume the complete analog, the complete meta framework. You
Mm,
have only the platform, which is the basis, the foundation, the layer, the main layer, and then you can only use Vitest, just very small parts of analog, but you don't need to use everything if you don't want to have all of it.
that's an awesome point. Yeah, we can
Yeah.
just add it selectively to the
Yes,
game.
exactly.
Nice. And I think you told me that the API we go with when using Vitest really looks like the API we know from Jest. So there is
Yes,
not a break.
exactly. That's also a very important thing. Vitest says from itself that they are supporting Jest code for 100%. So there
Mhm.
should be an easy transition path from Jest to Vitest if this would come up in the future. Again, the Angular team doesn't really have support or doesn't really plan to use Vitest at the moment. But from their side, they also made the argument, if Vitest gets a kind of a momentum, and we see
Hmm.
that the numbers are exploding, we can already see momentum. So I personally think we are already in it, but it will take some years that Vitest kind of climbs up to the numbers that Jest has at the moment. But either way, they're saying, well, if Vitest is the number one and we need to support it, then at least for the developers, it's very easy to migrate because
Mhm.
of the compatibility.
Cool, cool. So let's come back to the main topic about more coarse-grained tests, tests on component level, mocking a bit less. You told us before, when we want to do component tests, we can come from one direction, which is the direction of unit tests. We at least use the same technologies used for unit tests, like Jest or Jasmine, and add some libraries to the play, like Spectator and Shimox or the testing
Mhm.
library. This is one approach. But there is also another approach. We can come from the other direction, where we start with end-to-end testing frameworks that also try to adopt themselves to this middle ground of going with a component testing. So what can we expect in this area?
Exactly. So this is something we have already for 2 years or so. And
Mhm.
I'm going to show the slides afterwards, but just give you a quick of an overview what this is all about. When you compare end-to-end testing code, for example, from Cypress with test code written with Jasmine or Jest, it doesn't matter. You can see a huge difference in the readability because Cypress end-to-end testing is usually way shorter, easier to
Mhm.
understand, you're way more productive because you don't really have to care with asynchrony or asynchronicity. I once asked a British person what's the real name of it, and they said you can use both. Um, Change detection, DOM events, everything's there because the end-to-end testing tool is using a browser, and the browser and everything, it's just like a communication as you would do with an end user. You don't need to control all these things. And with the native tools or with the testbed, you have to do that. Now, the idea was that they said, what if we could use those kind of the the simplicity of end-to-end testing also for component or integration tests. So because we know already that we want to test via the DOM, so why not try to only take some parts of the application, a component, maybe some services, maybe some subcomponents, also maybe give the developers the possibility to decide what they want to mock, put it into a browser, run it as an application, and then let the developers use end-to-end testing tools to test this particular component. And
Mhm.
this is this direction that you meant before, where we are seeing end-to-end testing frameworks coming from, going towards component and integration tests. And the slide should be seen here.
Mhm.
Right, here we have it. So at the moment, when we talk about stable solutions, then there is only Cypress. Cypress has component testing support for Angular.
Mhm.
And yeah, you see it in the drawing. So you can write integration component tests with Jasmine, and also with Jest, but you could also use Cypress for it. And if you look again at this kind of developer experience that you have with Cypress component testing, then you usually want to go with that part for integration and component tests as well. There are maybe some disadvantage. You will have to pay a little bit in terms of performance. Cypress component tests tend to run slower than the Jasmine and Jest tests, but you
Mhm.
gain so much in terms of developer experience that you just say it's worth it. At least that's what the majority says. And of course, that also means that Jasmine, kind of the use case for them, falls down to unit tests, where, as we have discussed in the beginning, we don't have so many of them anymore because, yeah, we don't have so much logic usually.
Mhm. So that sounds awesome, but I think that Cypress is currently challenged a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, so the challenge for Cypress at the moment is Playwright. We have already Playwright for quite some years. We actually saw it coming, but we are now in a position where we would say, yeah, it's now becoming really serious. And I have prepared here some slides as well.
Mhm.
Let
Sure.
me quickly switch over. Right. So what we see here are the download statistics for the last 5 years.
Mhm.
And the orange color shows Cypress. So we see here this kind of success run. We see that Cypress kind of climbed up very, very quickly to number one. And since 2022, we see that I have here three different libraries of Playwright, in the
Mhm.
way they all kind of make up Playwright, but I can remove at least Playwright and just leave it with Playwright Core and Playwright Test itself. Now, the interesting part is, depending on what you see as Playwright, if you say Playwright Core is the one that you count as Playwright, then we would say the current number one, and you see that the gap is already increasing, is
Mhm.
Playwright. If on the other side you say, well, Playwright Test is more the testing framework because Playwright Core can also be used for remotely controlling a browser. It's not just only for testing, but also for more. But if you say no, it's Playwright test only, then there is still some gap between Cypress and Playwright. But looking at the numbers, looking at the trend, it's obvious that it is just a question of time until Playwright will overtake Cypress and will be the number one. So this is the
it has a
situation.
whole different slope, I guess.
Yes,
And so they will meet soon.
Exactly. And you also see here it's just between these two. So if you, for example, say the Angular has partnerships, the Angular framework has partnerships with other end-to-end testing frameworks like Test Cafe or Nightwatch, then you see that these two, they don't play any role. It's just about Playwright versus Cypress in that regard. And there are some reasons why it is like this. So I wouldn't say this comes as a surprise, because I mean, we've discussed this already in former interviews, but we see that the advantages of Playwright are becoming more and more and more. And from Cypress perspective, there is, at least that's the way how it looks like, there is nothing which they can counter with. And last year there was a Cypress conference. There was also a video, so it's public information. And in the video, it was kind of mentioned that it is a possibility for Cypress, for example, to use Puppeteer under the hood, so that they are already using another kind of library. They're very similar to Playwright, but not an end-to-end testing framework, because they see just it can't follow up anymore with Playwright. So maybe they have to switch here a little bit. But then again, this kind of the strategy that Cypress wants to evolve into maybe a better testing framework by using other frameworks, or by providing testing for the complete stack. So for units, component, and end-to-end testing. Yeah, we have it for component end-to-end testing, but also for unit testing, we don't have anything in Angular. This is something I already hear for a very long time, and I don't see some new developments in that regard. And the time speaks, or that I think, to put it bluntly, time's running up for Cypress, so they have to do something. And if it's just this that they are kind of using a Puppeteer or Playwright under the hood, maybe yes, but nevertheless, in terms of end-to-end testing, Playwright will probably win it. Or not just probably, but I think we can already see this as a fact.
So why is Playwright that popular? What does Playwright in a better way?
Many things. So first of all, Playwright's coming from Microsoft, which means they have an infinite amount of resources compared to Cypress, obviously. You know already how Microsoft works. That's actually it's an open secret. It has already been told also by Microsoft employees that whenever Microsoft wants to get into a certain market, that they will pick the number one leader. They will try to kind of copy or try to do everything that they are doing, but just doing it better, kind of overtaking it with the resources that they have, and then in a way becoming the number one. And this is exactly what we see at the moment with Playwright here as well. So we can say, if you look at Cypress, or the reason why Cypress became number one, is that you have a stability in your tests. You can trust those tests, and you also have a very good developer experience. So it's very easy to write tests with Cypress. And this is something which Playwright understood. They said, okay, we need to have both things, stability and the developer experience, but then something on top as well. And we know that Cypress has some deficits when it comes, for example, which is due to this in-browser testing. So what Cypress is doing, that the testing code always runs in the browser, which means the majority of our testing code is as any normal JavaScript that runs in the browser. It can't have full control over the browser, which means we have some limitations. We have some boundaries. We have some constraints For example, we can only control one particular browser tab. I can't open 3 browser tabs in Cypress and control all of them at once. That's not possible. I cannot also just jump between origins that easily, because Chrome says you have JavaScript coming from that particular origin. Now you are somewhere else. Why should I allow you to execute JavaScript from that origin? And of course, then this is something where particular application types can't be tested. I mean, luckily for Cypress, we don't have so many use cases where we have multiple tabs, but those things that do also exist, which is a problem for them. But what we have very often in the meantime is that I need to authenticate myself as a user. So I'm going to a Keycloak instance, I'm going to somewhere else in order to log in. And then I have exactly this kind of problem. Now, Cypress has done its best in a way to kind of mitigate it, to make it possible. There is, for example, PsyOrigin. But I mean, these are all problems we're discussing here coming from the design of Cypress, that the test runs inside of the browser. And this is where Playwright immediately said, no, we are not going to do it like this. We are running our test outside of the browser. For example, maybe a quick story that I might want to add. It was asked once by some developers for the Angular team why they are not using, for example, Cypress because it's that good. And the answer was, well, they say there is a click on a button, but it's more like getting the DOM element and calling the click method on the DOM element. That's not really the same thing. I mean, in the end, in most cases, it doesn't matter if you call the method or if you really try to do the real click. But for the scope that Google has, or for the amount of users that Google has, that really counts, and that's one of the reasons why they didn't use a Cypress. Now, Playwright says, okay, we are running the test outside. We have full control over the browsers. So all those kind of issues coming from running tests inside of the browser just don't exist for us. So they don't have to spend their time fixing all those things because it's just not a problem for them. This is one thing. The other thing, of course, is again this kind of backing up by Microsoft, that they don't really have to earn money in that sense. I mean, of course, at some point in time, somebody you also, of course, want to get money for Playwright, but that's another story. But they have the possibilities to give away certain features for free. For example, parallelization. So where Cypress says, when you want to run our tests in parallel, then you need to use the Cypress Cloud. That's a paid service. Yes, but Playwright says, no, we don't need it. You can do this on your own. We provide parallelization out of the box.
So you really get it for free. You can run it on several charts and get it for free.
Yes, exactly. And then, of course, you also have the Playwright team, which is also very good because the core team is made up of former Google employees who worked on the Chrome DevTools protocol, so they know exactly how a browser works. And then, of course, for them, I would say, easier to write a testing framework for a browser compared to somebody who might not have written a browser so far.
I see. That sounds awesome. So what is the interest of Microsoft into this, or how do you think want they to earn money with it in the mid or long run?
They also have something like the Cypress Cloud that's called Asia, which is a completely different thing. So if you compare it, of course, yes. Which again, I mean, it also speaks for Microsoft or for Playwright in that case, because they say, yeah, we also have a cloud service which you can pay money for, but you get way more maybe than Cypress can ever make up, because again, Azure is a completely different thing, and they have an integration for Playwright into it as well.
Ah, yeah, sounds good. That means if we want to pay a bit, we can run it in Azure. If we don't want to pay to Microsoft, we have to host it by ourselves.
Exactly. So if you want to support Microsoft, then yes, you can give them money,
Azure. Oh yeah, I think this is quite an honest business model.
Yes.
because it gives people options. If you want to have a bit more convenience, then it costs a bit of money. If you want to run it by yourself, then yeah, you can
Yeah.
have it for free. That's super
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. So I think Microsoft is also very honest in that regard. I mean, they say as it is. There is, for example, this
Mm.
TypeScript Origins documentary, where from TypeScript also comes, of course, from TypeScript, and TypeScript comes from Microsoft. And
Yeah.
there they also explained exactly this kind of strategy. We just pick the best product in the market, copy it, but just doing it better, outperform them.
Mm.
That's
Oh
the
yeah,
way how it is.
nice, nice. But I think there is a little tiny catch when it comes to component testing.
Yes. No, of course. Yeah, you have a problem with Playwright when it comes to Angular because, yeah, what do you do? If you have an Angular application and you then say, okay, obviously, in terms of end-to-end testing, Playwright seems to be the better choice. So I'm going with Playwright for end-to-end testing. But what do you then do with component testing? Do you then use
Mhm.
Cypress? Yeah, you can do it, but then you still have the open question what you use for those few unit tests you have. You can then use Jest or Jasmine, and then you have three different testing frameworks just for
Mhm.
testing. And then there is also another framework which you actually have to use to write your applications with. That's Angular. That might be a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And so you have at the moment, I'd say it comes down to three different choices. You can say, as I said, Playwright, Cypress component testing, or Jasmine. You can also say, no, I bet everything on Playwright. I want to have it in the end-to-end testing. I don't want to use Cypress because I just want to have a second. I just want to have two tools, which would then mean Jest or Jasmine, but together. And here I would say with the testing library. So then you
Mm.
pick the testing library for component tests.
Yeah.
That's one way on how to go. And then the last thing would be that you just put everything on Cypress and use Cypress for end-to-end testing, for component testing, and then of
Mm.
course, yeah, just Jasmine for unit tests. This
Oh
is
yeah.
what we have at the moment, at least. That's the three
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah. So I think you told me when you already have a huge code base, if you don't start from the scratch, then you would rather stick with your current choice, which might be Cypress. If you start with a new project, then perhaps it's rather Playwright in the short run with another library, like the
Yes.
testing library, or in the long run just a Playwright, because in the long run it will support component testing. Is that right? Did I get this
Yes,
right?
yes. So maybe I can even clarify it even more. So,
Hmm.
I mean, you know how it is. We can always say it depends on what you should use,
Yeah.
but I think when it comes to end-to-end testing, I wouldn't say anymore. It depends. I would say in most cases, Playwright is the better choice at the moment. So
Hmm.
a very clear statement in that regard. I think the time has come that we say yes in most cases. Again, I leave myself a little bit of space, but yeah, I would use Playwright if I have a new project without doubt.
Hmm.
So I would
Yeah.
immediately take it end-to-end testing. Um, if you have already existing tests, as you said, then there is a high chance that, first of all, the migration might not be that easy. And second,
Mm.
that maybe you have it under your control. So there are usually developers who know how Cypress works. They know about how to deal with certain aspects. And then you might not have this kind of pressure that you say, okay, we immediately have to migrate. Cypress will not go away. But you still, I would say, you should maybe start thinking or investing time a little bit. Maybe you create a prototype or a testing
Mhm.
balloon or however you want to call it, where whenever you have new tests that maybe you want to try out Playwright
Yeah.
for end-to-end testing. So this is something which I would recommend. And then again, the decision is yours. You have to, of course, you have to balance. You have to kind of compare the costs it would take to migrate from Cypress to Playwright, and you also, of course, have to know about the benefits. As I said, you
Mhm.
get parallelization. You get also something which is called the trace viewer, where you have, for example, in your CI, a very good report telling you what went wrong with your tests. You also get this from Cypress at the moment, but it's coming with the commercial version. But there are also some other features with from Playwright that I've mentioned before. Yeah, but then if you have an existing project, it's really up to us. I wouldn't say you have to wait. If you say no, we have already a lot of pain or huge problems with Cypress, then of course the answer is also very clear. Then please check out Playwright, and in most cases you will be happy with it, and then also that's the way to go. The other thing, so if we say, existing Cypress tests versus non-existing Cypress tests, that's one dimension. The other one, which is special only for us Angular developers, is the question of component testing, because there is no alternative from Playwright at the moment. But here also things are changing. So there is one of our colleagues, this is Younes Chadi from France, where is he? Lyon. He's working on a Playwright integration, on an Angular integration, Angular component testing integration into Playwright. He's not alone. There are also other people who help him. Of course, the Playwright team, but also, for example, Brendan Roberts. I've also seen him in the GitHub discussions, and somebody from the Netherlands. So they are working very, very intensively on it. And I think it will just take a few weeks, and then we have a Playwright component testing as well. So in general, if you have some doubts about component testing and you say you can wait for a few weeks, then I would do it. And then I would just really check out the first prototype that we have of the Playwright component testing for Angular. And then maybe the answer is clear.
Awesome. Really great how all those strings come together. And it's also great that we are in the fortunate position to give a recommendation, because now we have the numbers, as you have shown before. I think last year this was not really the case. There, we already saw that Playwright has quite a slope, but the numbers were quite low, and so a definitive recommendation was not that easy then.
Exactly. I think you always have to be a little bit careful if there is something new in the field. They usually highlight only those things where they are better compared to the old ones, and maybe you miss that maybe some basic things aren't even available there. And of course, also the kind of long-term perspective is also important. But I think with Playwright, with Microsoft in the back, that the long-term story is not an issue. And we also see that Playwright kind of has advantages in all fields. So yeah, I would say it's now time to give a clear recommendation for Playwright.
Awesome. So are all those topics covered in your workshop? You are doing an Angular testing workshop with Playwright?
Yes. So in the Playwright version, we have the first day with the Playwright basics, and then the second day will be at the moment with Jest. And there, as I said, we're using the testing library because I don't want to I only have 2 days. We only have 2 days, so I can't use Playwright end-to-end, Cypress component, and then also Jest for unit test. That's not possible, and that's why we go with Jest. But as soon as the Playwright brings out this component test, we will use it also in the workshop. And as I said, it's just a question of weeks or maybe even days. Yeah. I mean, Easter is near, so maybe we will get an Easter egg or however you call it.
That would be great. I think the next installment of the English version of this workshop is in June. So chances are high you will also talk about the Playwright component tests there.
Yes. So I'd say it's the way how it looks at the moment, it's quite safe to say that the June workshop will already have the component tester.
Nice. That would be awesome. So for the case you are wondering what we are talking about, if you visit us at our website, not ORF, but Angular Architect, then you see this guy here, and then you can switch to English. And if you scroll down, then here we have, where is it? Oh, Cypress edition. No, we want to have Playwright edition, don't we? We want to have the Playwright edition. So let me look it up.
There it
Yeah,
is.
here we have it, Playwright edition in June. It's even US friendly. It's on 3 half days. And yeah, here you'll find all the details, the agenda, and Rainer's picture, and yeah, all the details, what you will learn in this course. And of course, then there is also a button to book your ticket. It's
Exactly.
fully online, and yeah, you can participate during 3 days. Are there practical exercises?
Yeah, a lot of them, a lot of them. So,
That's
of course, for the Playwright part, but of course also for the unit testing part, because as I've mentioned before, it's crucial that when you have to use Jest or Jasmine, that you know how to deal with asynchrony. You also have to know what the testbed is all about, how to use it, because it will also play a role in Playwright and also in Cypress component testing, because under the hood,
mm,
they also use the testbed. But so, yeah, it's just important that you also know about the basic rules there as well.
makes sense. Cool. Yeah, and I like the exercise part. This is how we learn,
Yeah,
especially
exactly,
adult
exactly.
people need to deal with it.
Yeah, and also discussions afterwards. So if there are some questions coming up, or maybe I just pick out some exercises which I find interesting and maybe show a different variation of it or explain the specific case.
Awesome. Yeah, Rainer, thanks for coming today. Thanks for sharing your extensive knowledge about all of this. I mean, it
Thanks.
was not only knowledge, it was also baked with statistics and statements from the Angular team and
Yeah,
things that happen in the community. So it was really awesome. Big thanks for this.
yeah. Thanks as well.
See you around. Bye bye.
Goodbye. Yeah, goodbye.